So I want to introduce what I would call two of my friends, but it might put Brian's political aspirations to be associated with me. So I'll just say two gentlemen that I respect very much for their involvement in the community. I may not agree with what they say all the time, but they both have hearts in the right place, and they're trying to do what they think is best for the community. And I would like to give each of them a minute or so just to introduce themselves. Brian, why don't you go first?
Sure. So I'm Brian Wheatley. I've been a teacher in Evergreen since 1985, and I have 5th and 6th grade my whole career. And I've been president of the Evergreen Teachers Association since 08-09. So in round numbers, I taught for 25 years, and I have been doing the president gig for 10. I do try to keep my toe in the classroom when I can, so the second to the last day before school was out, I was singing camp songs with second graders. So if we have some time at the end, we could sing a few songs.
Thank you, Jim.
Good evening, I'm Jim Zito. I'm one of your 5 board trustees and have been for the last 7.5 years. I've had the privilege of representing this community on the board. Before that, I was on the planning commission for 8 years. I've been an East Side resident since 1984. 3 of my children went through the school district, and just recently my son graduated 8th grade last year. He's now just finished up his freshman year. Like Brian, I have always had a desire to give back to the community, and I felt that after 25 years, a little bit more than that, in the private sector, that being on the school board with my background in land use and management might help, but I felt I needed to take another step. So last year I actually got into the classroom. So I've been an 8th grade math teacher for the last little bit more than a year. And so I have been teaching, and I've got to know firsthand the struggles, challenges, joys, and what can I say, that the hard hours that the teachers put in, but also looking at it from the parent perspective and the student perspective, what they need as well. So thank you all for being here, and I hope that tonight provides answers to many of the questions.
Okay, thank you, Jim. And also I want to point out that Wesley Lee is recording the event. We will have a link posted on the District 8 Community Roundtable website, so you can view it later if you want, or you can share it with your friends or whatever. And if you want to take a minute now to tweet or Facebook that you're getting informed at Grace Church, that would be just super fantabulous. Thank you, Wes, for doing this for us. Just a quick rundown of I'll call them the rules of engagement for this thing. This is an information forum, it's not a debate. We're not here to try and determine who's right or wrong or who has the high moral ground. We're just trying to get information out in the interest of transparency. We want you to know what's going on in our school district. Based on that, there's no time limit on the answers. We're going to put the question out there. I will try and balance who goes first, who goes second, but some of the questions are specific to particular people. And so it makes sense for that person to go first, but they will both have opportunities to discuss each question, should they care to do so. Please respect that they're here voluntarily. In the interest of improving our community's understanding of what's going on. Don't cheer or jeer anybody during the question and answer period. Please hold your applause till the very end, in which case we can give them rousing applause. And if you don't like what any of them said, talk to them afterwards outside. We're going to try and end at 7:30. We have a lot of questions that were submitted ahead of time. We hope to be able to provide a chance for live questions at the end, but we want to be respectful of your time. So if we get to 7:30 and we're out of time, I will ask if they're willing to continue a little bit. I'll ask if you're willing to continue a little bit, and ask if Pastor John is willing to let us stay for another 15 minutes or so. Okay? Makes sense?
That's good.
Let's go. I'm going to get right into it by explaining first the negotiation process, because I didn't know a whole lot about it when we started this. And very quickly, these two helped me understand what it is. So it's 4 phases, I think, maybe 5, I don't have them all 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The first one is negotiations, where both sides have an obligation to sit down and negotiate in good faith to reach a settlement, or to reach a contract agreement. The second one is impasse. Either side can say, we're not getting anywhere, and let's go to mediation to get a third party in to help us reach a conclusion. In mediation, the state appoints a mediator to help them reconcile the differences. At some point in time, he's going to say, we can't do this, and you proceed to fact finding. At any point during this entire process, the two sides could reach an agreement. Outside of the process, even they could decide that, well, we've figured it out, so keep that in mind. In fact finding, there's a panel that's appointed that issues a report with the recommended terms of the settlement. But neither party has to agree to it, so it's optional. And then after that finding, after that recommendation is issued, after the report's issued, the district could legally and unilaterally impose their last, best, and final offer as conditions of employment for the teachers. The union could legally hold a job action at that point in time, up to and including strike. So right now we're in the fact-finding phase, I believe. Mm-hmm. They're nodding in agreement, so I got that one right. And so that's how the process goes, all right? And that's where we are in the process. So we're going to start with the questions that were submitted to through the internet, wonderful thing that it is. And the first question that I've got here is, why are negotiations done yearly? So Brian, you want to field that one?
Sure. That's completely up to the parties. We often have looked to set up multi-year agreements. The most recent example of that was, forgive me, I have to do it in my head, I believe it was 13-14, the last time things got this difficult, and we were looking at a 3-year deal. I was hoping for what we would call a closed contract, but in order to do that, what we would seek is to have some kind of monetary number, ideally in a salary increase in year 2 and year 3. What I was basically saying is that there's a value to having multiple years of peace and tranquility, et cetera. Unfortunately, in that year, the district was concerned about the fiscal future. So I don't negotiate as the president, but I was sort of floating the idea, what about a 3-2-2? Would that be something? And the district was not comfortable putting any amount of money in year 2 and year 3. So yes, we had a 3-year contract, but it was essentially 3 reopen salary and benefits, which, as teachers will tell you, is, and probably District 2, is the heart and soul of the main meat and potatoes, although there's certainly many other issues, class size, et cetera. So, and then just a bit of historical note, we ended up negotiating every year for those 3 years. We ended up with 3, 4, 3 1/4. So that's enough for now.
Jim?
Yeah, I mean, it is what it is, right? So the bottom line is that both sides agreed to either 1 year, 2 year, or 3 year, and if they could come to an agreement in the first year that it covers all 3 years, then great. If they can't, then they, like we did in this case, agree to what specific items would be opened in prior years or subsequent years, right? I do have to make one important announcement, and that is, while I am a board trustee, I am here as Jim Zito. By board policy, I do not represent the district or any board members by me sitting up here. The answers I give you are my answers, to the best of my knowledge, and should not be construed as coming from any other board member or especially the district. And I have to make that disclaimer.
Or from the board itself.
Or from the board itself, exactly.
Correct. All right.
Thank you.
Good.
Yes.
So Jim, we'll let you start with this one. There's a perception that there's a lot of he said, she said out there. Can the scripts of the negotiations be made public?
My understanding is no. My understanding is that would constitute negotiating in public if we take what was discussed in negotiations and basically the actual scripts back and forth. What can be discussed is what's been put on both the ETA and the EESD websites, and that is, here's where we are, here's what our last negotiation offer was, and this is where we stand. And I think that's, yeah, but the details of a mediated conversation, no, those are private, if I understand correctly.
Okay, Brian?
Yeah, I mean, that in essence, that is true. I don't think that he said, she said comes out of what happens at the table. If we boil the table down to the ETA bargaining chair and the bargaining chair for the district, they know exactly what each other is saying. What sometimes happens is what's then gets, you know, that telephone game, right, of what gets sent out from there. And of course, a huge part of that is, you know, I don't know that it's he said, she said, but the district operates off a 3-year budget, which they have to do by law. They have to create that 3-year budget. But for those of you that have budgeted, the first year is not a problem. The second year, you can pretty well guesstimate. The third year is pure thrown at a wall and see what sticks. And absolutely understand why a district would make that third year not good, because it could potentially be not good. And in some ways, the way the budget system works in California, you almost have to cry poor to ensure that you're going to continue to get funding. We are, depending on which number you use, either 46th in the nation or 41st. You know, 41st would be. But we struggle with, and I think this is where a lot of the tension comes from, the district wants to negotiate based on that third year as fact. And we struggle with that greatly, because it has never been fact when we then go back and check what they said was going to happen in 3 years, and then 3 years later we look at it. Sorry.
Yeah,
it was a little long, but I think that's where the real he said, she said, from my perspective at least.
Yeah, I find the process somewhat frustrating because you're constrained by what's factually known going forward, and you can't extrapolate on historic trends. Mm-hmm. So, but those are the rules that the state makes you play by.
Sure, absolutely.
Around that. Brian, this one's for you.
Oh boy.
Yeah, there you go. The ETA is blaming the district for not approving a health plan last year. This year they went ahead and did it on their own. Why didn't ETA just do that last year?
So this is one of the misconceptions, I think, because although technically I suppose last year was 17-18, so we've done a series of year-by-year negotiations. So in February of this year, we have what's called the Health Benefits Committee, and we go out periodically to look at other possible ways to manage benefits. And a JPA, a Joint Powers Authority, is a way to enlarge the group, share the risk among a larger pool, and hopefully reduce the cost to everyone. We didn't find out about it until February, and there was surprisingly a significant savings if we moved to the JPA for 18-19. So we found out about it in February. We were hoping to do it within the scope of negotiations. That didn't happen. So after mediation did not work, which would have been mid-April, the 17th is the date I remember, we decided to unilaterally have a vote to move to SIS because we thought it was what was best for our members. And I approached the district and I said, look, if we vote yes, and I think we will, we'd like to then sort of do what's called an MOU. I apologize, there's way too many acronyms in our business, a memo of understanding to say, yes, let's do this, because I'm a negotiator at heart, and this is good for the district, it's good for the teachers, let's do it. Ideally, it would have been better to do it within negotiations, but that didn't happen. But there was no previous year where we could have done something.
Okay. So that's very interesting to hear your perspective, and I respect it very much, and it answers a lot. Okay. And I say that for this reason. Back in 13-14, to use that year when we were negotiating the big year, right? Right. Last time. Mm-hmm. The concept of a JPA came to the board and was discussed with the board back then. And it was discussed saying that, I'm guessing it's okay to talk about past negotiations, right?
Go for it.
So we were told that there is a JPA, that we should probably look into it, and we should probably make how can I say, recommendation or an offer to the other side, to the teachers union, that this JPA exists, and see if they'll go with it, because it's going to save a lot of money. I knew about this JPA in 13-14. Okay, and every year that it has come up, why aren't we doing the JPA? Why aren't we doing the JPA? We're told they don't want to discuss it. It's not on the table.
Interesting.
So this is where I have to say that, again, I'm speaking as me. Okay, this is what I've come to know, all right? And I went, because what was discussed to us when it finally came to us was, we were in negotiations and this was brought up and we presented it and they agreed to it and we're gonna vote on it next week or whatever it is, next month, right? So there was a whole misunderstanding is probably the best word I could use as to how it came to be that it became an item. And then my question at that point was, how are we voting on this outside of negotiations? Right? I think you were in the meeting when we did
at the board meeting, yes.
And I said, I don't understand. I thought this was part of negotiations. And I was told, well, we can do this. I'm like, great, this is wonderful. I mean, we should have done this 4 years ago.
Yeah. It's a good deal for both sides.
Right.
So.
It was a great deal, and it saved us, something in $700,000 to $800,000 a year.
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
we're not debating, just to clarify, we did go out to the same JPA 3 or 4 years before. The quote was not good.
Oh, maybe that's... Okay.
This quote was surprisingly, I don't usually go to those meetings expecting good news, for those of you that have gone to health benefit meetings, and this was surprising good news. So I apologize, we're not debating.
No, that
that's
may
good.
answer the fill in the holes.
Yeah.
Jim.
F.
Now that the teacher, I'm just picking you because you went first
Good.
twice in a row. Now that the teachers have agreed to move to a new group insurance plan that saves money on both sides, what are the unresolved issues that have kept the teachers union and the school district in the impasse process?
So I see 3, and maybe there's 1 or 2 more, but the 3 that I see is that there's a request for a slight salary increase. There's a request from the district to sever our obligation to pay into the teacher's trust. And there is wording, there's what they call language in the contract that would allow, if the need come to be, to raise class size to 27, from 24 to 27 to 1 on the primary grades, which is K1, 2.
Can you explain the teacher's trust, either one of you guys?
You want to go? You want me to? So maybe I'll just go, because
yes.
Just to piggyback on what Jim was saying, yes, the other piece on our side is a request to look at more teacher prep time that's unassigned prep time on Thursday afternoons. Currently, in a month where there's 4 Thursdays, there's 2 that the teachers can use as they see fit. The other 2 are for particular things that the district designs. So it's a non-cost item. So we were saying, we would like to have more of those Thursdays. On the district side, there's also a 0% salary increase, which is a concern. In terms of the trust, I always like to talk about myself. The trust has been around since the year I came into the district in 1985. It is a post-65 retirement benefit. But what it also provides for actives is disability insurance. So, in case you haven't noticed, I'm disabled. I have cerebral palsy on the right side of me. That does not qualify me for disability insurance, but I often say, in the situation of the district, were they to stop funding the trust, something that they've been doing from 1985 till now, I have been counting on it my whole career. I'm now 57, not just for the post-retirement. So obviously there's an issue, and so there was that, and then the class size piece, yes, we currently have a number in the contract that says 24 plus 1 that allows the district flexibility for that child that you can't find a spot for, and getting 1 bus for the 1 child to get them to the school that has an opening. So there's where that flexibility is, and they are requesting to increase it to 27 TK to 3rd grade. So not TK, from...
Okay. Right. I just want to follow up on...
Full disclosure, my wife's a kindergarten teacher, but just full disclosure.
I just want to follow up on one thing you said,
sure.
Brian, or Jim might be able to answer this. The rationale for eliminating district payments into the trust, I'm curious about that. And before that, do the teachers make a payment into the trust out of their salaries?
You want to start? You go.
I think I can answer both, and you can correct me if I'm wrong.
Sure.
Please do. My understanding is that the only contribution that's made currently is by the district, It's something in the neighborhood of $160 plus or minus dollars per month for management, and what was it, 140, 145, something like that for teachers, something like that, that the district makes to the trust. The trust is an annuity, so it invests and it builds up and it pays out if it's needed. It's kind of almost like a self-insurance policy of sorts. If the district chooses, well, if the district negotiates that they don't have to pay into the trust anymore, the trust still lives. Nothing changes. All the money that's in the trust stays in the trust. What happens then is either the teachers take over the payments into the trust, or they choose to do what they want, but whatever money is in there will still provide benefits until they're exhausted, right? It is a benefit.
The only increase in the trust then would be through any investment gains that happen to exceed what they pay out.
That is correct. That's right. So they make investments, and hopefully over the last couple of years they've done well, like most 401ks have and so on. But this is the rationale. I think your question was, what's the rationale of the district wanting to stop it? Is it's about an $850,000 a year benefit that is paid out into the trust, and with the things that are being cut, things that are on the chopping block, if you will, one of the things we'd like to negotiate is, you know, this is a benefit that no other school district that I'm aware of, anywhere in California or anywhere else that I'm aware of, has. This is a really nice thing to have. It is definitely there and has contributed to our ability to attract and retain great teachers. No question about it. You know, there's no argument there. The thing is that, is it a luxury that we can continue to afford to pay into? And when it comes to class sizes and teachers, you know, keeping teachers in classrooms or ELs and so on, the thought is the money could be better spent.
So what you're saying, if I can paraphrase very quickly, is that the district is trying to figure out the most effective way to educate our kids. And the question is that enhancing the effectiveness of our ability to deliver quality teachers with a quality education? Did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Just a few minor points. The current contribution for certificated for teachers is $128.50 a month. Okay. There's an addition, and this is where I get a little fuzzy. On the admin side, it's an additional $29, I think, a month, which gets to the $160 you were talking about. And it's absolutely a major part of our district's, it has been for a long time, ability to attract and retain, as Jim mentioned. They have used it for a long time in getting the best to be here. And that I believe absolutely that that's a huge part of doing what's best for the kids, for the students in the classroom, is making sure we have the best in front of the people standing in front of them.
I don't think anybody would disagree with that.
So we've got a hand, so I'll let you as the moderator, how we go with that.
How long has the trust been in existence?
1985.
Thank you.
Two things. Is that 10-month payments of $128.50 since teachers are paid for 10 months out of the year?
Yes.
Can you speak up and
So she asked if it was
10-month payments of $128.50 since teachers get paid 10 months out of the year. My second question is, if the trust did not exist, would the district have to pay some amount of money for some kind of disability insurance for its employees? Is that a requirement?
So I don't know that we want to spend all the time, because there's other things, but just a couple of quick things. This started historically, the district was paying essentially disability insurance, and a group of teachers went to the district and said, we can do this better. Give us the money, we will manage it. And they actually grew it over the course of decades into a post-retirement benefit. Just one little thing about the assertion that if the district stops paying, the trust will be okay. When you look at, the trust does 30-year actuarials on long-term, so that the new teachers will be able to have this benefit just as someone my age. We don't need to get into the fact that I'm 57. But those actuarials are based in part on that influx of money. And so without that, the worry is theoretically, at 57, you know, so the benefit kicks in at 65, I might be able to take advantage of it for a year or two, God willing that I live longer after I retire, but that it will essentially, the outgo in terms of paying out benefits will exceed the return on the investment.
Yeah, the statement wasn't that the trust
Sure.
would be okay. The statement was that the trust would continue until the funds.
Sure, true, good point. So, I mean,
all right, so you're right, we should move on because there's some other important topics to cover. We're going to shift from the negotiations into the school finances and the finance situation there. Jim, why is there a funding shortfall and how long have we known about the problem?
So there is a funding shortfall because the revenues coming in from the state do not cover the expenditures that the school uses to pay its bills and provide its services. It's that simple. One of the reasons why that is the case, even though we're getting additional funds from the state with the LCFF funding,
That's
local control funding formula, our funding went from something in the neighborhood of $95 million in the 2011 timeframe, all the way to 120 something million. Did I say thousand? I meant to say $1 million in the latest, right? But what's happening though is we're seeing a demographic fall off of student enrollment, and there are different opinions as to why that's happening. Partially, what's true is kids are aging out. I lived in my house 20 years. My last child graduated in middle school last year, so there are no more kids from my family that are going into the schools. However, there are a lot of new families that are moving in too. The question is this: are they sending their kids to our schools? And again, this is just me speaking. What I have been able to determine is that we're under assault. I mean, there are a lot of competition for our kids. There are charter schools, there are private schools, there are so many different ways that people can send their kids and to educate their kids that they're starting to choose other ways besides our district, okay? And so while it is true that there is a demographic fall off, okay, it's also true that we're losing kids because people are trying other options. Now, will they come back to us because they find out that those options aren't very productive? Maybe so. But the school that I work for, as an example, is a charter school. And I know for a fact that one of the students that I taught told me at the end that they would have gone to labor, but they chose to go to this charter school. And I asked why, and they says because they felt that what they were being taught was more in line of what they wanted to learn. Okay? So,
Brian?
A great deal of what Jim talked about is absolutely true. We absolutely have a problem with declining enrollment. We do have a small portion, areas of the district which are dealing with charter schools. Particularly, this is where you're going to find out my geographically challenged brain. In the northwest corner of our district, where Catherine Smith is, where Leva is, they are dealing with charter school incursion, for lack of a better word. But really, the primary driver of what's happening is the lack of affordability of housing here in Evergreen, that we are losing families to the Central Valley because they can no longer afford to stay here. So, it's reflective in the fact that, you know, some of our own members are surprised that we asked for a 0.5% salary increase for the 17-18, the year that's just now over, because we absolutely understand, we know the budget, we understand, and we would never ask for something in terms of a salary increase that would put the district in financial difficulty. That was actually basically just to help out with, because the money that we pay towards the premium went up from 16-17 to 17-18. So since we haven't settled 17-18, for example, again, talking about myself, my take-home pay was less this year than it was last year, because in terms of having to pay out a higher amount. So that's where the 0.5% came from. But there are definitely some issues that the district is struggling with. Just a quick plug, since you did a PSA, in case you were wondering what this clipboard is about, there are issues, as I mentioned when I mentioned that California is either 41st or 46th in funding. There are issues that are outside of Jim's control as a trustee. And I would love to, if you want to come talk to me about this, there is something that would love to see on the ballot for 2020 to help with some of this funding throughout the state, but just in Santa Clara County would bring $1 billion back to schools and community services. So, like I said, we'll save that for later. But we've got hand. You're back in charge.
I know. Thank you. So we'll come back to questions at the end. In the interest of time, so.
I have to tell you, as a teacher, it's hard for me not to call on them.
I know, me too. Brian, you might be able to answer this. Jim may.
Okay.
I have no clue. Where are our high property taxes going? I mean, I send a lot of money to the county every year. How can we pay so much and still have such a shortfall in the school's budget?
So I am going to have to defer to Jim's experience, particularly on the Planning Commission and elsewhere. I think he knows this better. Then maybe this is personal. I know exactly how much I pay in property taxes. I was actually thrilled because where I live, which is San Jose Unified, they put forward Measure Y, which the focus was the bulk of that money was to go towards teacher salaries. And I thought, wow, what a great idea. So I absolutely was in favor of that, and it passed, and it's going to mean not an earth-shattering amount of money for teachers, but since what we know is that we're struggling to keep teachers, that same driver that's driving families out is driving teachers farther away from where they teach. And that's fundamentally not good. Being a part of the community in every sense is what's best, and it doesn't always work out. So that's a politician's answer. I'm going to defer to Jim on the specifics because I don't know.
So if you look at your property tax bill, there are a lot of components to it. There are 15 different items on it. A lot of it is, government stuff. For instance, they just put garbage on your property tax bill, right? So they put all kinds of stuff. Some of those items are specific to schools. For instance, bonds. So bonds that we pass as a resident for a district is money that a school district could use to build their capital infrastructure, their buildings, their facilities, improve it, so on. And you will pay a portion of your property tax to repay those bonds. And that's specific and it only goes to that. It doesn't go anywhere else. The other one is the parcel tax, which we have agreed to put on in the November ballot, right? Which is a set dollar figure per parcel that once again goes to the school for the items that are indicated in the ballot language, which be music and art and small class size and whatever, right? Every school district could either put bonds or property taxes. Those aside, which are specific to schools in that district, you've got the bulk of your property taxes, right? Some of it is sewer taxes, some of it is water district stuff, some of it so on. But what I understand is the actual property tax portion of your house. You have a $1 million house, you pay about 1.2%, so $12,000 toward the county. The money goes to the county, and the county then disperses the money to various things. We have 2 hospitals in the county that are public hospitals. They are funded by your property taxes. Okay, there are mental health programs. They just passed a bond, a $900 million bond to provide affordable, but not just affordable, but homeless shelter housing.
Right, the Measure I fund.
That's what I was going after.
Right.
And so part of your property taxes pays for that. So what I understand, and nobody can really pin down a number, but somewhere between 15 and maybe 20% on the high side of your actual property taxes, general property taxes, go back to the school district. And that's why we are a revenue limit school district and not a basic aid school district. There are school districts up in the Palo Alto area and so on that pay so much in property taxes that they get what the state would give them, plus they get to keep everything over and above that. So they get upwards of $15,000, some cases $18,000 per student.
Sure.
Right? Would you agree?
Oh,
right?
you're spot on.
Right? Yeah. And we get something like 9. Okay, so we get half that. And so, you know, where do all the property taxes go? They go to a lot of different places. Unfortunately, most of it isn't coming to the school district.
Right. The moral of the story is we need to build a football stadium. I don't mean to be flippant, but it actually turned Santa Clara Unified School District from a revenue limit district to a basic aid district because of what's coming in from Levi
So
Stadium.
the term revenue limit versus basic aid, could one of you explain that real quickly?
Well, it's sort of a misnomer now because the actual funding changed, but in the old system, it really was, so Evergreen, I'm trying to figure out to do this in a way that doesn't, we could spend the next 3 hours just on this.
Well, let me back up then. So one gets to keep the property taxes that come in because they exceed what they would get.
Right, the surplus.
And the other one gets a set amount.
Right, which was based on, and maybe we've got an expert in the audience that maybe later, because I'm assuming from your realty background, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to call you out, but Mylene's got a lot of experience, but our limit was set in the 70s. Right. They made a determination about Evergreen based on the 70s, and for those of us that have been around for some time, we've changed quite a bit. I remember when I first started teaching in 1985, how much we have changed. But so anyway, like I said, we could do a whole thing on just that.
Let's go on to Jim. What's the projected budget deficit for the next 3 years, and is there agreement on the amount of the shortfall amongst the parties?
So I'm going to tell you what we just got this past meeting, which was last week. We were told that, once again, to Brian's point, the numbers changed, right? And so in April, we were told that we had an $11.8 million deficit with a close to $3.3 million hole in year 3. As we talked about, we always do 3 years out. We are now told, let's see if I can get that right number, here we go, that we are going to have less than $10 million, so $9.5 million deficit, but we're going to end up $1.7 million in the black, okay? However, the key element is, what is the deficit spending? We are still spending in the last, in 17, 18, close to $3 million deficit spending. In other words, we spent more than we had in revenue. In 18, 19, we were projected to be $6,000 in the hole. We're ending up to be 1.6 million in the black. In 19, 20, we were projected to be $8 million in the hole, and this is looking more like we're going to be $6.5 million in the hole, okay, as far as deficit spending. And then, like I said, for 2021, we were projected to be 11.9 million deficit, and we're looking at something in the neighborhood of 9.5.
So it's getting better.
It's getting better, and it typically does. As Brian mentioned earlier, what happens is we have to work on the numbers that we get from the state.
True.
Right? And then what happens is every May, we go up, I don't know if you were there this year, but the bus trip to Sacramento, we typically go up there and find out, talk to our legislators about what's the latest budget situation and are we going to get more money. Well, one thing that happened is LCFF full funding was supposed to happen 2 years from now, but we're going to get full funding 2 years early, which means now we've reached the pinnacle of where we're supposed to get, what we're supposed to get, and we'll be flat as far as the funding. Now we may get COLAs, cost of living increases, but the amount of money that we were supposed to get, we're going to be getting next year, and that'll be the maximum of what was projected to give us, right? But what happens is because of our Prop 98, it is guaranteed that we get a certain percentage of the budget. And so if there's more money in the budget than what the governor had originally projected, then we get a portion. I say we, school districts get a portion of that, okay? And so what I just heard this last week was we're getting another $49, I want to say, per student extra over and above what we had planned on getting. And so we were able to put that money in the budget and say, now we know we're getting this, we can now bump the numbers up. Until we know we're getting the money, we can't put it in the budget. Same way as we don't know what the negotiations are going to finally yield. So right now, that's flat. If it ends up where our employees, and we have a peanut butter approach to raises, if the ETA negotiates a raise, typically the other two employee groups get the same raise, typically. So being that hasn't been negotiated yet, nothing's in the budget. If we do negotiate something, that's going to impact the budget. They're going to have to come back to us with a new budget saying, now we have made this agreement, this is the new contract, and this is how that contract affects the budget. So on a monthly basis almost, there are changes.
So you can only project, as I said earlier, what's certain.
By law, we can only project what is certain.
Even though that will ultimately be wrong. Brian, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, just a couple things. I think the 49, I think that was the 0.49 increase in the COLA, unless, rather than $49. I don't mean to, I'm just thinking, anyway, so that's absolutely true. A couple of things that just, again, sort of our frustration as we watch this process. So when we look at the numbers that the board was presented last Thursday, one of the things that it shows is they are projecting an increase in the ending balance reserve the end of next year. So they're projecting that they're going to have at the end of next year $4 million more. And you know, for us that's right? And some of this is not the district's fault, because we have a governor, God bless him, who underrepresents revenues. So what would normally be going through to districts as ongoing revenue, he underrepresents that revenue. And then districts added, because Jim's right, the district for every year that he's been governor, the districts have gotten additional money, but it comes through as, at least figuratively, one-time money. Which districts, because budgetarily this is like 101 of budgets, you don't want to take one-time money and put it toward an ongoing expense. Except one of our refrains from our perspective is there's one-time money year after year after year, because it's kind of built in the way Governor Brown has operated every year, and it's happened again this year. So it's a little bit of a struggle for us, because, and we can even see, even when you say, and totally understand what Jim said about, you know, they're looking at the LCFF reaching full funding, and then what they're projecting COLAs of 2%, and their expenses in round numbers are 4%. As a trustee, as you see that gap and you project into the future, and you see, you know, those, what do they call those, alligator charts, right, where it gets bigger and bigger and bigger, except as we look at it as what actually happens and the money that actually comes in, the alligator closes it. Well, that's a bad image, because then it's like it's snapping something's head off. But so I need a better image. But so that's where the real struggle is. We love to look at the unaudited actuals, which are the real numbers for the year, and they come out in the end of August, so we'll see it in another couple of months for the year that just happened. The district will say, oh yes, we are deficit spending, you know, we are projecting to deficit spend, you know, 3 million or 4 million. Well, that's wonderful. We want to see the actual numbers, and we all the time create trend lines based on what's actually happened. We are hesitant to create trend lines based on projections. I often get this question from members, and Nellie Yang is now, she's resigned from our district, she's working in Cambrian, but does Nellie lie? Absolutely not. One of the things she has to do, she can't count on, I hope, that our parcel tax passes in November. It's a slight increase, these things happen, inflation, etc. So it's going from 100 to 125, right? So a little PSA for the soon-to-be parcel tax. But Nellie could never include that into the budget, because until it passes, let's hope it gets to 66.7%, until it passes on November 6th, that revenue has to be taken out of the budget, that in round numbers $3 million in 1920 and 2021, right? Because 1820.
1920.
Right, so she has to pull that money out of the budget. So when they report, it's minus that $6 million, which absolutely is true, but we also know how wonderful our community has been in supporting the Evergreen School District, and we hope and think it will continue. But until it does, you can't count on it. So it's part of the insanity of budgeting.
So the answer to the second part of that question, what I'm hearing is that there is agreement on the amount of the projected shortfall as it's calculated, because it's calculated per legal requirements by the state.
Absolutely.
But there's disagreement well, there might not even be disagreement. There's a belief on at least one party's part that the number is just flat out incorrect. And maybe on both, I don't know.
We should have him at the negotiations table, just to summarize.
All right, so what are the causes of the budget deficit, Brian?
So this is where, you know, it gets into an area. I often talk about what is the union purview, for lack of a better word, you know, and a lot of this has to do with priorities on the part of the district on where they want to put money. So, but a huge part of the deficit is the fact, and again, it's a little bit sound like a broken record, it goes back to this, the base funding that was set up at a time when we were much more, not agrarian, but just think about the number of plum trees and cherry trees, so that we have increased from there, but we always were, as Evergreen, we were always rurally, yeah, and lower, and even though it moves up, we've always been sort of playing catch up, and the district has done, over the years, has done a fine job. They are, comparatively to other districts, very thin in terms of admin. Right? When you compare the cost of admin of our district compared to other districts. So you will not hear me jump on a soapbox. I might jump on a soapbox about some things, but it's not going to be about admin costs, because if you compare them to, I don't want to pick on Franklin McKinley or Allen Rock, but comparatively, we do very well with the money that we have, and there has been a commitment towards paying people a good salary and a decent benefit, because the belief has always been that you get what you pay for, in a very basic sense.
So you say it's a revenue problem.
It's
that's based in history.
To a large part, yes.
Jim, your thoughts?
Well, it's hard to argue with Brian. I mean, the logic is there. You get what you pay for, absolutely. I think, though, that there is definitely a disconnect on what is the best way to serve our students. I know there's been a lot of discussion about class size. I am a very strong proponent that smaller class sizes in the primary years make a big difference in the kids. How they learn, what they pick up, just having that attention, it builds them both mentally and academically. Okay? So for me, I've said it many times, so I'm not saying anything new here. I will never vote for an increase in class size, because as long as we are paying for it. And right now, our property tax, that parcel tax, guarantees a lower class size. If we pass this next one, hopefully we will, I am going to say the same thing. I don't care what, you know, the recommendation is. I will not vote for a larger class size. Being in the classroom this past year, that's even come through to me even stronger. Okay, and I teach 8th grade, so I have no choice but to have 30 to 32 kids. Okay, and it's difficult. When a couple of kids are absent, it makes all the difference in the world.
That's true.
Okay, the next thing that we tend to do a lot of, and Brian brought it to the board's attention even more so last year, was these combo classes. And how combo classes really put a heavy burden on teachers. They put a heavy burden on students, I think, right? You better have the right students in your class that are independent workers. You better have a great lesson plan. Otherwise, you risk really losing those students. And my whole goal was eliminate to the most possible the combo classes. And I think that, to me, I would rather spend more money on keeping teachers than having smaller class sizes, because if you're going to eliminate combos and you're going to reduce or keep class sizes low, you've got to keep your teachers. And that means you're paying more salaries. So from my perspective, okay, and again, I could only speak for me, right? It may sound insensitive. I completely get how much it costs to live here. My daughter just moved just this past week to Rio Rancho, New Mexico, because she can't afford to live here with her husband, who wants to be a cop, and she's going to complete her credential for teaching. I did not want to see her leave, but she said, I gotta go, Dad, I can't do it here. I get it. Trust me, I get it right here. But I would rather have more teachers, lower class sizes, no more combo classes or limited combo classes, than if the choice is there, than to pay a higher salary to administrators or even our rank and file. Because to me, it helps the students and it helps the teachers to have less stress.
Okay. So Jim, what cuts are being proposed by the district administration to close the budget shortfall?
So I can tell you what was already voted on, okay? And I made sure I got my papers here. And what they had already cut were things like instructional coaches, ELD instructional assistants, reductions in instructional support, parent engagement, staff development, site technology. We put a cap on all cell phone stipends, which wasn't very much, but we found out that there was $950 million in travel and expenses in the district last year.
That sounds too high.
But part of it was
1,000.
Yeah, 950. Did I say million?
Yeah, you did.
My mistake. I'm sorry. Too many zeros. Too many zeros. $950,000 in travel and expenses. Yeah, it's hard to do when you only have $100 million, which is still a significant amount of money, about $1 million a year in travel and expenses. Some of that for professional development. Some of it for going and getting awards. I mean, we are fortunate that a lot of our schools win awards, and we have to go down to LA or we go up to Sacramento or whatever the case is, right? And so the board has said, look, you must implement a 20% reduction in all travel and expenses, right? So we have even made cuts on the administrative side behind the scenes as well. Now, are they huge cuts? Not so much, but when they add up, right? So the ones that we voted on were the ones I discussed with you. When the board considered those, the one thing that we were told was that many of those positions that were cut can be, they will have a mitigated effect on the students because the activities that were performed or provided are going to be done a different way, either by teachers or by administrators or through different programs, but that the student won't see as much of an impact. It's not like we're just cutting it and it's gone. Now that's what was told to me, a trustee, when we made that vote, all right? These will be mitigated because there was a huge concern about cutting services and programs close to the students, okay?
Thank you. Brian, what thoughts does your organization have on how to close that shortfall?
Were you talking about the projected shortfall that we don't really?
That one.
So I have a hard time making cuts based on a future that we don't believe is actual. I mean, in general, I mean, I find it fascinating. I've never heard that number of nearly $1 million in travel. So I certainly will be looking into that as the union president and as a concerned teacher as well, because that is quite a bit of money. I've never heard a number that large. Thankfully, it's not whatever you said, millions the first time. But yeah, it's an interesting dynamic. This is a free country. Jim absolutely can believe what he wants to believe and say, you know, as a free country. It is very confusing from our perspective to negotiate when management is saying one thing and their proposal on the table is, again, an increase of class size to 27 in TK to 3rd grade, and the fact that they must have this because they must save the money, and then to hear Jim say what he says, it's very difficult for us to negotiate with what seems to be a moving target at times. So, but you know, again, Jim has a right to speak his mind.
Well, so it sounds to me like there's a larger process issue here in terms of determining the funding available in any particular school year. Because the state tells you have to calculate your budget based on known facts and not on projections.
Right. And it seems like the current board majority as well as the current management takes those numbers almost, and I'm trying not to make a value judgment here, but as reality, whereas the previous boards and previous administration understood that this was part of, I don't want to say the game because it's very serious. We're talking about funding for our kids, but in terms of the need to do a 3-year budget and particularly what that 3rd year represents, or doesn't really represent in terms of reality.
I feel like I have to respond to that for two reasons.
Go.
In the past, you've come up to the board during these budget cycles and said, look, you're saying that in year 3, this is going to be what it is, and we have proof that in all these past years there hasn't been enrollment reductions, there hasn't been deficit spending. And you have, in my first few years on the board, in my first few years on the board, 10, 12, had very effectively convinced me that because of this 3-year process, we were over-conservative in our numbers, and that enrollment figures weren't as bad as they were saying they were going to be, and deficit spending wasn't as real as the budget office was projecting, right? However, in the last 4 years, I find that to be the opposite. We are seeing significant enrollment reduction.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Scarily. 5 years in a row, 2,000 kids. Go ahead.
Right, exactly. And because of that, there's no doubt that we have a reduced revenue collection that we're getting. Even though we're at full funding of LCFF, we're getting less money than we got in partial funding of LCFF. Okay? The second thing is deficit spending. I mean, you look at history, there's no question that in some prior years we have had millions of dollars of deficit spending. So now I look at it and say, well, do we have to be more conservative than normal? I think the answer is we should be more conservative than normal. And I think that what we need to do is figure out how to turn around our problem. And our problem is the loss of our children. Why are we not getting the kids in our district? Because every child that we lose is approximately $10,000. That's true. Okay? So what can we do to attract and retain our students? And this was something that was on the strategic plan goals 2 years ago, but somehow got taken off. And we are, again, Jim Zito talking. I do not believe we are as competitive as we can be in retaining our students. It's that simple. Okay? This will cost money. Anybody who has been in the business sector knows you've got to make investments to attract customers. It's that simple. We need to have an IBB. We need to have dual immersion. We need to have full funded STEM. We need to have lower class sizes. Okay? And the only way we're going to do that is to pay for that. Pay for those programs, right? And when you pay for those programs, that money comes out of a very limited budget. We can't raise prices on our products like businesses can because we don't sell a product. We get what they give us, and that's the end of that. Okay? So once again, we go back to how do we reverse this trend of losing kids? Because every child we retain is $10,000.
So just out of question, out of curiosity, do you know roughly what teacher salaries and benefits represent as a percentage of the total spending for the district?
You talking?
Either.
So 5 years ago, it was a round numbers percentage, 52%. It's currently 48%. So that goes back to that priority thing that I was telling you about, that we're concerned about a shift in priorities and how that's going to affect the continued ability to attract and retain.
You're talking only about teachers.
Yeah. Certificated salaries?
Right. Okay, so total salaries and benefits for the district. Okay.
The number I was talking, I thought you asked salaries.
Salaries and benefits.
Oh, that number is just salaries.
Okay.
I don't know. I'd have to go back. You'd have to give me homework to find out what that. I just know because I would.
like homework from me, so I
no, I know. So I just know that on the salary side.
So I have those numbers here. Okay, and I can tell you that for all salaries and benefits, I'm not going to, because again, we do a peanut butter approach. Everybody gets pretty much the same raise. Everybody gets pretty much the same benefits. Okay? So it is anywhere between 89 and 93% of the budget.
Well, 5 years ago, it's 87 to 88 now. It's again that same trend line. But again, you're talking about all groups. I'm sorry. Now we're debating.
For all intents and purposes, right. Those are close to the same number.
Okay.
So it's
okay. The trend line is what we're concerned about.
Yeah, and that's a valid concern. So, all right. I was just curious about the cost structure there. So you talked about the declining enrollment. Have we closed any schools? Is that a tool that can be used to close the deficit? Jim, you get the first shot at this one.
And I'm happy to, because that's the 800-pound elephant in the room, right? That is a tool that can be used. That was presented to us by what was called the Facilities Advisory Committee. And when the board, and I can say that the board asked the district to put together a committee to study all the facilities and to find out the best use of our facilities, okay? And what we were hoping to find was where are opportunities that we could increase revenue, because we rent facilities out, we have land that's surplus, like for instance what's on the Martin property, and is there any way that we could generate revenue in a creative way? The Facilities Advisory Committee came back and said, close 2 schools. To step back 1 minute, let me just say this. Before that even happened, the administration had already decided that Dove Hill was going to be closed. And they sort of leaked the information that Dove Hill was going to be closed, which sent the people at Dove Hill off on a tizzy, okay? We had to walk that back because that did not even go before the board. So that discussion of closing Dove Hill wasn't even brought up to the board, okay? But yet those comments were made that we have to close the school. It's most likely going to be Dove Hill because it's one of the oldest schools, right? And the board, because this was back when Bonnie Mace was president, so this was 2 years ago, okay? That's when we put the FAC together and said we need to study this and really go through and get community engagement, okay? They came back with, we got to close 2 schools. Okay, well, what is it going to save us? We don't know, but it's going to be about $400,000 per school. Okay, what is it going to cost us to close the schools? No answer. What are we going to do with the schools once we close them? No answer. So, is it an option? Absolutely. But back then, and I can tell you, again, I'll only speak for me, I could not vote to close schools at that time because for me there was not enough information to know if we really needed to do so and what the impacts would be on the community. Closing schools is the nuclear option. Once you close a school, it is the one irreversible thing that you will do in your district. If you lay people off, you can always hire them back. Okay? If you stop a program, you can always re-implement the program. But if you close a school, you will not reopen it. And the reason why is because typically that land has to be dispositioned within a couple of years. Something has to happen to that land. Okay? So, as we have seen all night, the budget numbers change. And we were told that we're going to make $800,000 by closing 2 schools. We're going to save $800,000 by closing 2 schools. $800,000 did not come close to the $20 million that we were told that there was a shortfall. So closing 2 schools and putting 2 communities through that pain and agony, right? Doing all the rebounding, figuring out where all the kids go, plus the fact that studies show that when you close a school, you lose between 15 and 25% of those kids to other places other than the schools that you assign them to. So now you've created a problem where you're losing additional ADA because you're losing 15 to 25% of your enrollment. So the $800,000 that you might save, you might lose it by not having those kids in your school. It hadn't been studied enough. So we put together 2 committees, a joint use facilities committee and a land use committee. And both of those committees came back with this, okay? And what this is a complete detailed study of every single facility and site that the district owns. And what is the usage of each site? How many classrooms, how much square footage, sports fields, etc. And what we found out by working through the consultants is, for instance, the Martin property. There was a 2¼ acre facility there that was doing nothing. It wasn't even looked at. And the decision to close schools was made before that was even looked at. And now we find out that that is a $10 million property that can generate us close to $500,000 a year in ongoing revenue by doing a ground lease to that property. Okay? So these things weren't even investigated. And to make a decision to close 2 schools without having this kind of background and understanding what you can do made no sense to me. That is my reason for voting the way I did.
Okay, Brian, what are your thoughts on school closures?
Yeah, it's a tough situation to be in. I mean, I was on that original FAC committee. We were given a task. We fulfilled the task as it was originally given to us. It became a moving target as it proceeded. It is a difficult situation to be in. As I mentioned, we've lost 2,000 kids over the past 5 years. So we currently have the same number of kids that we had in 1997, and we have since built 3 large schools. J.F. Smith, help me out, Clark and Matsumoto. So we've got a problem with the number of schools that we have. If we keep all of those schools operating as schools, that's where the money that Jim mentioned, the $400,000, that represents the front office, so that's the principal, the secretary, the health clerk, the janitor, and then the sort of the power to keep the building up and running. If we, in an ideal world, having, if we just talk elementary schools, because this is not an issue currently with the middle schools, if we just talk about, wouldn't it be wonderful if we had 15 small elementary schools? Unfortunately, the way California currently funds public education, that's not fiscally sound policy. So just looking at it from the budgetary side of it. In terms of looking at other ways to use parts of properties, again going back to the FAC, the recommendation we looked at using 2 of the properties that you're talking about as that was part of that original report that was presented. In terms of going forward, we are where we are. The board has decided to wait. The concern with waiting is that the projected drop of enrollment is expected to continue. So the worry is that the problem will worsen while we don't actually do anything about it. And again, it's a difficult thing to be advocating for repurposing a school. But the upside of it is not only are you saving money in the operating cost of a school, but then you can on the positive side generate revenue with that school for using it in another purpose. So it's an interesting problem to have. We are where we are. The joint use has presented that wonderful binder to the board. They will need to make a decision fairly soon as to what it is they want to do. They are the elected people that have been given the power to decide, how best to go forward, and we will see where it all goes forward. One last thing, and then I don't know, there's a couple of questions, and the moderator's in charge, but, Jim mentioned the idea of how, splits are not a good thing. Well, the problem with small schools is they create splits at every grade level, because there's simply not enough kids. So you end up with 1 first grade, a 1-2, 1 second grade, a 2-3, 1 third grade. You don't do a 3-4 split usually, because you have to have it at the lower, the primary grade level size. But then you have 1 fourth grade, a 4-5, 1 fifth grade, a 5-6, and 1 sixth grade. And in terms of the ability to collaborate, essentially nobody has a grade level partner, right? And so in terms of and I understand, Jim will say things like, he's for eliminating splits, but in essence, what the board has decided to do now, 2 years after the FAC made their report, is we're now continuing this trend that, and last thing, Matsumoto, which those of us that have been around for a while, remember when it was over 1,000? It's projected to be under 500 by 2021. So I think that's probably enough for me. Thank you.
Could Jim go through the recommendations for the joint use? Because most people here haven't gone to the board meeting. So I think that would be beneficial to the community.
Sure.
What the recommendations are.
Okay, so that's okay with everybody?
Yeah.
They handed us a very well thought out.
Be brief though.
Yes, 14-page that talked about facilities, but it boils down to 6 recommendations. Those recommendations are as follows.
Who made the recommendations, Jim?
The recommendations were made by the Joint Facilities Use Board Advisory Committee, okay, which was made up of about 25 members of the community, including teachers, classified, actual members of the community, parents, and a couple of board members. All right, so one was analyze facility use fee structure for the purposes of recapturing potentially lost expenses to the extent allowable by law, because we are limited by law how much we can charge. Identify at least one high-quality opportunity for preschool or daycare that could be housed at a school site. Maximize facility use to realize a 25% increase in district-wide revenue and explore value pricing along with long-term lease agreements. Identify sites that have excess space for ground lease while maintaining school sites with sufficient green space. Repurpose entire school sites and reboundary students. Identify a portion of the school site for ground lease and utilize the remaining portion of the school site for a leading-edge educational pilot site. And within the long-term facilities master plan, which we're hoping to get in the fall, identify options to reduce school site footprints and build up to maximize space available.
So those were the 6 recommendations.
Those were the 6 recommendations, and I can get into some of the more detail.
When they talk about repurposing, what they're really doing is talking about closing in one of those recommendations.
Right. The repurposing could be, we had even talked about the possibility of creating district charters, right? And having a district charter for instance, something like IBB or dual immersion or some things like that, okay. Right?
All right.
So.
Let's move on to teachers for a second. Or 10 minutes. So teacher morale is low and many are leaving to other districts seeking labor peace and respect. With talks of a possible strike in the fall, what can the district do to repair the damage and bridge the divide between the district leadership and the researchers? And I'll let you two figure out who's going to go first on this one.
Ed, I mean, this is kind of the way I try to operate. I always look for examples of win-win. When we found out about the CISC option, that it was actually going to save both sides money, I went to everybody that would listen and I said, look, take the cap off the table because that would help relieve some of the pressure that we're currently in, and it would maybe, back everything up and calm everything down. The district chose not to do that, and so I worry that it feels like at every opportunity where we could have walked this back a little bit, where we could have done something that everybody wins at. So the cap, it looks like, is off the table, which is a good thing, finally. It just took going through mediation and all the and we had 2 rallies, and we had so what I tell teachers is, great job, they did the right thing. They took this retroactive cap off the table, but I have some very smart teachers. They said, yeah, they did what they should have done 4 months ago. Well, I know, but at least, right? So at this point, I'm hoping that the legislature will come up with a budget approved any day now would be my guess. They don't get paid, I don't believe, if they don't get it in by the end of the month. So it's amazing how that has been happening lately. It will likely show more money for schools, and again, I'm hoping that we can, something can happen. The district called for a meeting on June 7th. We thought that was a good sign. Nothing happened on that day. There was no movement. And so we did, I don't know if you've heard, but we did have a strike authorization vote the Monday and Tuesday, the first 2 days of the last week of school, because we felt like the district doesn't seem to understand how frustrated teachers are by this seemingly unwillingness to move forward. So I'm not really giving you a very good answer about how to fix it. It's kind of what I do as much as I can, and sadly, I have been not very successful in the last year. So you're saying
forward progress on behalf of the district would help?
Yes, that would help.
Jim?
I think it's like anything. I mean, if you're married, you know that you get into things with your spouse, and you've got to figure out how to make things work, right? To make sure that the kids don't suffer. And I kind of look at that in here too. I mean, the real comes down to is assume best intentions. And I don't see that being the case. We went through interest-based bargaining, and I think that interest-based bargaining is meant to kind of put it out on the table. What's your interest? What's our interest? How do we meet that? How do we get there? I mean, we both say that we have the student's best interest in mind. I mean, that, if you ask anybody, they're all going to say, yeah, that's what it is, right? And I don't have anybody say no, right? So if that's truly the case, then it's a matter of coming to an agreement on how to get there, right? So if you assume best intentions, then you would be more asking the question of why do you feel that way, as opposed to, no, I'm not doing that, right? So it's to me, and it's also not bad-mouthing each other, right? And that's another key thing. I hate to say it, but sitting behind that dais at a board meeting, again, I'm just speaking as me, you think you get paid nothing? We get paid nothing, okay? Practically nothing, and we catch a lot of the brunt. And, you know, you do your job, and you don't have the kids' best interests in mind, and why would I be there? Why would I be there? Why would any of the 5 of us be there if we really didn't have the best interests of the kids in mind, right? The 5 of us have different opinions, no question about it. And this board, more than any, has 5 individuals that have different opinions, right? But theoretically, if you work together, you get the best of the 5 put together, okay? But having, you know, things go on Nextdoor saying this person is this and that person is that, and this person hates your kids, and this person says this about teachers, it's just not productive. It's simply not productive. It's not mature. It's not the right way to do things.
So focusing back on the question, what can the district do to
I can't speak for the district. I can only say, think best intentions, move forward, make sure we understand why each side is saying what they're saying.
Okay. This is the last prepared question that I'm going to ask you gentlemen, and then we'll see what we want to do. There's a perception in the community that our teachers are among the best compensated in the entire country, as well as in the entire county, as well as benefiting from a good health care plan, significant time off relative to a regular workforce, I'll say, not that teachers are irregular, but I'm summarizing this thing because it's very long.
Right.
So why are teachers unhappy and feel that they're not adequately compensated?
So I guess that starts with me.
Sure.
Theoretically, I should know that. So I just have to. I know we're not debating here, but we absolutely did IBB, which is interest-based bargaining, where you talk about each side's interest, and at every turn, the district interest was a balanced budget. Balanced budget, balanced budget. And so I'm thrilled when Jim says things like, you know, both sides are here for the kids, but when board members say in open session, our primary goal is to balance the budget, that I have a concern. In terms of the whole, I've been the union president now for a decade, and so I've heard this question in various iterations about, come on, you get time off in the summer, you get all this time off, and so you've got great benefits, and so I'll just suggest if you're interested in knowing more of sort of this. The myth versus the reality. If you're interested in going to our etanews.org webpage, right at the top, there's a whole section on parents. I mean, you can look at anything you want, but right at the top, there's a section on parents, and there's a link there that talks about teachers' pay. And just talking about the summer, that the classic examples people say is, well, teachers have summers off. It's an easy job. And often people talk about, you have 10 weeks where you don't have to do anything. Well, chop off 2 weeks at the beginning where you're prepping for your class for that year, and 2 weeks at the end where you're closing down your class, and then, oh, by the way, any kind of improvement that we want to make in terms of classes or whatever, we have to pay for out of our pocket ourselves. So I always struggle when people compare to industry, right? So, but in the larger picture, and again, I go back to when you look at salary and benefits and you talk about Evergreen, we're talking about what used to be, and the concern is there has been a shift in priorities, particularly in the last 5 or 6 years, and one example is what I mentioned, and that chart's on our website too, that shows the percentage of salaries. We are a people industry, we can't, you can't automate me, at least I don't think you could, although you probably could do a better job, but sorry. So, there's a real struggle with it, that things have changed in how this district fundamentally values its people. If you want to look at just in terms of money, it's not only about money. There's a lot of other things that we struggle with. Just to give you one example that just breaks teachers' hearts is the district will say, well, we have to inform the community, so they will put their negotiations update. They will blast it out to every parent that has given their email so they can find out about their child's education. It's on every district webpage, every site webpage, the district's point of view. And if we want to share our side of it, we have to stand on a street corner and hold up a piece of paper and hope that somebody will be willing to hear our side of it. So thank you, first of all, for coming tonight and listening to the perspective. I don't know that we've made any progress in resolving anything. That's one of the struggles for me as I've done this for a while, as I wonder some days, am I actually moving the needle forward? I think there's absolutely, assuming best intentions is absolutely where I always start from, but when I'm over and over again shown examples of outcomes that are not best intended, and after a while it becomes difficult just in terms of the morale question, which I sort of answered at the end.
Yeah, thanks, Jim.
I want to ask you to repeat the question again, only because...
Oh, damn, I already put it away, man.
What about teachers?
It's generally believed that the teachers in Evergreen are the best compensated in the county, along with time off and health benefits. How come they're not happy?
I can't answer why they're not happy. I can only say that what I'm told is they don't feel appreciated, what is being expressed to me. I'm a firm believer that you could appreciate people many different ways. Being a people manager for many years in the private sector, I was many years without being able to give my teams raises. As a matter of fact, there were times when I had to cut their salaries because business was that bad. And how do you appreciate somebody when you say, by the way, you got a 10% cut in your salary? And what it is making their work environment more inviting, more productive, and where they can see the fruits of their labors. I know now more than I ever did how important it is to reach each child in your classroom. I know how important it is to have an aide come in and help me with my SPED kids. I know how important it is to have time, prep time, to make sure that my lesson plan is spot on, otherwise my kids are going to go off into outer space. Okay, I get that. And there are ways to provide things that are non-tangibles, I call them, that are not dollars and cents, right? That will make the teacher's workday more rewarding, maybe a little bit easier, and it will benefit the students and the teachers. And I think that I do believe that we are one of the best compensated districts in the county. Okay, fine. It is very difficult to live here. The number that's been thrown out is $95,000 a year is the average salary of our teachers. Why is that? Because we don't have any short-term teachers. Most of our teachers are already tenured. The other thing is they reached maximum salary in 12 years versus other districts that reach it in 20 or 25 years. So I understand that once you reach 12 years, if you don't negotiate an increase, you're not going to get an increase. Okay? So that there's got to be other ways, right? And that's the only thing I can say.
All right, good, thank you. If you guys are willing, I've got a couple of questions here that might be of interest to have answered. If you want to spend another 10 minutes.
Are you asking them or us?
Up to
I'm asking you first.
I'm.
And then the pastor.
Well, that's maybe pastor first. It's his building.
Then you guys. Well, no, because you could say no and walk out.
Well, that's true. That would look good.
And you guys don't mind. Kevin, you've been antsy back there.
I had just a comment. I want to thank Mr. the Union President, Mr. Wheatley, for being here. I want to thank Mr. Zito for being here. I think it's very historical and very wonderful. I'd like to make a neutral suggestion that we have more school district town hall meetings, because we could do this during a town hall meeting. It would be very beautiful, that we all, the public, could be there. The Evergreen School District has taped all school board meetings, so everyone can listen to the audio of the tape. And earlier, Mr. Zito showed informational on the Facilities Advisory Committee, and that is all on the school district website. So with a little bit of exploration, you know, you can find all this on the district website and be very well informed.
Okay, thank you. So here's it's kind of a three-part question.
Oh my.
And it's got to do with labor strife. Primarily, I can probably collapse it into one or two.
Okay.
Might the labor strife make it more difficult to pass the parcel tax? And might it also drive more students to consider alternative educational venues?
So the short answer, those are two things that I worry about all the time. We have lost, as I mentioned, 2,000 kids over the past 5 years. It's projected to continue. I believe, although this is more anecdotal than where I haven't gone and talked to 13,000 families, I believe there are families that have the financial wherewithal that are making the decision not to be in Evergreen because it seems since, well, it started in 2010. It really has been difficult since 2012, and it's kind of been ever since. So there was a big flashpoint in 12-13, and it's been difficult, and it feels like we're at a similar flashpoint, except the meeting that I mentioned that happened on the 7th, we resolved the 12-13 dispute on that similar meeting, and nothing happened on the 7th, so I'm very concerned. And I worry about the parcel tax. I think it is this community has been amazing, has been supportive of Evergreen. Again, I've been here since 1985, and first as a classroom teacher and now as the union president, have been so impressed with how involved and interested the community is in Evergreen schools and the strong belief in them. And I just frankly don't understand the current. I'm baffled by the fact that June 7th didn't produce at least some kind of movement that we could have built upon, because I'm very worried going into a fall where we would like to have a campaign to say, community, we've worked together, we want to continue to working together, please help us.
Jim?
Yeah, I mean, obviously both sides can say the same thing, right? The board was disappointed that we didn't have a TA as well. So
you can't speak for the board.
Fair enough. Fair
Sorry.
enough. So yeah. Do I think that it impacts it? Absolutely. I think one of the reasons why people, it's obvious that there isn't a single empty house in Evergreen. So this thing about people fleeing Evergreen and there are no kids coming in, there are. I mean, 2 houses on either side of me vacated and was filled with young families that have kids, and they actually are sending their kids to Evergreen schools, which, yay, I keep talking how great they are. But I know also, if you can afford $1.3 million to buy the average house in Evergreen, you could probably afford to send your kid anywhere you want.
Or not.
Right. Or sell it.
Because you spent everything you owned on the house. Yeah, exactly.
But
so Jim, there's an interesting informational question that came up. You made a comment earlier about funding went up from 95 million to 120 million. The question is, what time period did that cover, and what was the student enrollment at the beginning and at the end? And with 2,000 students leaving, shouldn't that reduce class size?
Well, all right, so can I take them in reverse order?
Yeah.
With 2,000 students leaving, it would reduce class sizes, except what the district is doing is reducing teachers to correspond to the 24 to 1 or the 30 to 1, whatever the grade level is, right? So, for instance, 3 years ago, there was a vote on the board to approve a TA, a tentative agreement for 4% for the employees. And at the same meeting, the board had to vote on laying off 24 teachers. And I said, why are we giving 4% raises when we're laying off 24 teachers? Can't we use some of that money to keep the teachers and reduce class sizes? And we were told that's not the way it works. That you keep the class sizes consistent and you reduce the number of teachers corresponding to the number of students in the district. So that concerns me, because yes, I would think that you could
Okay,
reduce.
so how many students were there when?
I do not have the exact numbers. I could only tell you that I'm looking at going back to 9-10. In 9-10, our both restricted and unrestricted revenues were $92,300,000. Went down to 91.9, then one started going back up and back down again, and then in 13-14 is when we started to see the uptick because of LCFF, and we went from 96.3 in 13-14 to 122.2 in 15-16. So in a matter of 2 years, we increased $26 million, approximately 27-28%.
So where'd the money go?
The money went into several things. We did restore a very few services that were cut, like libraries, okay? There was the encroachment on our PERBs and STIRs, right, which is continuously going up. I believe it started at something like the pension contributions that the district has to make. And overall, again, it's all employees. I'm not just picking on any particular group, but we gave 12% in raises since then. So that the cost of all just running the schools are higher, right? So I asked the same question. I said, according to the LCFF goals, we were supposed to be restored to 2008 funding with cost of living increase, right? So therefore, all the transportation that we cut, the gate that we cut, the class sizes that used to be 20-to-1 that we cut, should have all been restored, because we got all the money back plus cost of living, right? But that's not what happened to the money. We got encroachments from other places, right? In addition to the fact that, you know, it cost us more for retirement, and we gave more money in raises, and it costs more money overall to run the district.
So Brian, here's a question that maybe you want to take a stab at, or maybe not.
Maybe.
If the board wants smaller class size, higher standards, and more teachers, what's the ETA's opposition?
So a couple of things. Just you know, this is unfair in a sense, but one of the things when Jim was talking about the numbers, the increase from 95 to 122 percentage-wise, in amount of money, and then I mean it's wonderful that we got a 12% raise, but when you see the percentage increase in the amount of money they got, and then you see the lower percentage in terms of a raise after multiple years of not getting anything, you can see why where we are concerned about the priorities shifting, right? Because in terms of then fundamentally, while we're thrilled that we received the 12% increase, it was the same time that, well, I'm choosing to use the word, we were paying out of pocket for the cost share that we did, right? So there's that issue. It's always interesting to me too, just in terms of contractually, we establish maximums in class size. So our current maximum is 24 plus 1. And I've had these conversations with the board on numerous occasions over the years. There is nothing stopping the board from deciding, you know what, we are going to, because we have the money for it, we are going to lower our class size. Now, to do it across the district, at least in the past, that would have been difficult because the cost, that's potentially cost prohibitive. But the district has at times done added teachers at certain places, which has lowered class size. There was a commitment for a while to do it at title schools, which ETA absolutely supports that concept. We'd love to see it across the board. So when you say, I believe the question was something around being against.
Yeah, what's your resistance to it?
So when the board, so for example, I mentioned that they're projecting a $4 million increase in their reserve at the end of next year. taking some of that money and putting it into just because they have the authority to do it, to say, you know, and I'd have to do the math. If you did that at every school, how much money would it cost? A teacher with salary and benefits is about $100,000. So, you know, how many teachers could you get? But there is, when we set maximums, because we are worried if we do not have maximums, they would be exceeded. If we did not have 24 plus 1, that there would be a decision made, whether it's the board, the current board majority that makes that decision, or whether it's management. Ultimately, the result is the same. The purpose of the contract is to make sure there's a maximum. So lowering that, they don't need to negotiate a lower number with us in order to go below what the negotiated maximums are.
And the answer is that'll get you 1 or 1.5 teachers per school, roughly.
Right, which could, yeah, it depends on how you did it,
yeah.
Right, sure.
We've got time for 1 or maybe 2 questions from the audience. You were very patient.
She was, I agree.
One of the questions that I had put in there was about special day classrooms. Mm-hmm. So I don't think in any of the discussions I've heard anything about how special needs children will be affected with either the cuts that are being proposed or otherwise. So, right, will the services be affected? Or we already don't have district classrooms in each of the schools. Our kids are being shuffled around. Mm-hmm. Like if we have first grade in one school, second grade and third grade in a different school, and fourth, fifth grade in another school.
If you open up some classes, that may reduce transportation cost.
Exactly.
So this is more anecdotal. I don't know if I'm answering the question, but because I talk a lot to our special education, if you're not familiar with the SPED term. And they were thrilled that at Hollyoak, and it's partly because of space, because of the declining enrollment, they were able to have, and I believe they have a 1-2, or at least this past year, so that the students didn't have to move. They could stay at Hollyoak, at least theoretically, from, I believe, first grade through fifth grade, from kindergarten to fifth, thank you. Kindergarten to third grade. So, but it has been a problem for quite some time that those kids, one of my worries is that they're not able to develop relationships with the school community because they're in first grade here, and then they're in second grade over here, and then they're in third grade. So in terms of how the cuts affect that,
So my understanding is that the cuts deal more with English language learners and kindergarten aides in general than they do with...
You mean ELD aides?
Well, ELD is English language aides, right?
Right. So
right. And I understand that there's some lower primary aides that were targeted. No. No.
You're talking about the proposal?
Like art docents and that.
Well, I can't speak about that, but in terms of the proposal that the district currently has, no. That's not correct.
With regard to special.
Yeah, according to what I just read, I did not see anything about special ed being impacted.
There are no specific reductions.
Right, no reductions. However, I agree with what these parents are saying, is that we probably don't spend enough there in the first place. And that's really where the concern is. And unfortunately, we do have underrepresented segments of our community that, you know, for instance, we have parents who say, I want my child accelerated, and I don't understand why my child can't be accelerated. I've sent them to preschool for 3 years. They already know how to read and write, and they got to go to TK. I don't understand what the benefit is to the district to keep them in TK, right? We should be able to meet those needs of the parents. The same thing with the needs of special ed parents, right? I don't believe that we have all the information. I know I don't, as a board member, have all the information I need to make an informed decision, and maybe I'll say it, I need to be educated in what we can do to make it better for your students and for students, you know, who want to be accelerated and so on.
Okay. Fair enough.
Come to the board, request it during matters from the public, and maybe we can have it put on the agenda. I certainly would be in favor of that, personally.
Okay, thank you. He was up early.
Yes, I heard the mention of childcare for some of these rooms. You know, it's big business
Oh.
And it's a little hard on a lot of parents. And one suggestion I have, if that's followed up on, to give a discount to the parents who have a child in the school district. And that way you can also get that additional, whatever that is, $10,000, and it would encourage people to attend local schools. But the child care thing for parents, it's tough.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's take that as a suggestion.
Right.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Steve. Last question.
Very enlightening. I'll start with $900,000 for traveling. I would like for you to look into that.
I absolutely.
I don't think they have to travel to Sacramento to be receiving an award. The award should be given in where they work. The community should be giving them the award.
Maybe we could
So
do it
look for
virtually or
cuts in that
something.
respect.
I'm on that,
Okay.
absolutely.
Secondly, the fact that we're losing so many students and going is the same problem that we're having at the college, at community college. So look for the root of the problem. Engage the community. We will support for good teachers to stay, but you have to do your homework as well. Not just ask for the benefits that you're asking for. We will support that benefit if you earned it. Now, why are we losing that amount of students? I don't want an answer today. I'm just giving you the homework. Give me a strategic planning that you bring to the community. Work with the community, with the board, with the teacher faculty. Come together, have an ongoing involvement that we can help you come to the end goal for the students. Complaining, I was a teacher, so I know what you're talking about as well. Teachers should be honored to have the students graduate and to go on to colleges and to stay within the community like these community colleges. Why are they leaving to other colleges? Why are they leaving the elementary schools? It's the same problem. So let's work together, find out a solution so the community will be enriched, because that's the future for the workforce. So please, don't leave it just like that today. Invite us again to the forum, not only for these people that came today, that we need an auditorium, maybe another place where it's full, because we're engaged. When you can tell us the strategic planning that every one of you are going to produce, for us to make sure that we can also be part of that strategic planning. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
I don't want to do your job, but that sounded like a nice little...
It was a good wrap-up, and I want to thank all of you for being polite and for your interest in making this a better community, because it's all of us working together that makes that happen. So thank you very much. And I want to thank Rod for putting this together and the pastor for hosting. And I tell you, when Parag first approached me, I was a little concerned about I volunteered to moderate when he came up with the idea, and I was kind of concerned about these two and their behavior, because I've seen them interact sometimes, and I want to commend both of you for...
We were on our best behavior, were we?
Yeah, and good responses. Thank you very much. And that concludes the event. Thank you for coming.
Right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.